I didn't just rebuild a ghost town. I brought a whole community back to life, 250 homes restored from dust and silence. But the moment people moved in, Karen and Doug decided they were the new government. Not volunteers, not organizers, but rulers. They printed fake violations, held secret meetings, created a board that no one voted for, then announced new taxes, new rules, and new authority over a town I legally owned down to the last square foot. And when I called them out, they doubled down, claiming they had the right to rewrite the Charter Seas land for public use and override every decision I made. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't an HOA anymore. It was a hostile takeover. And they weren't just coming for my resort. They were coming for the whole town. The first time I saw the town, it didn't look like much more than a forgotten smear of dust and rust along the highway. The paint had peeled off every surface like old skin window frames dangled by corroded hinges, and the signs for the general store and the post office were sun-faded ghosts themselves, hanging on somehow despite decades of abandonment. No one lived there. No one even stopped. It was a place you passed on your way to somewhere else, the kind of place folks only remembered because their grandfathers used to work the mine that gave this town life and then took it away. I parked my truck near what used to be City Hall, though that was generous. It was a single-story brick building that looked like it hadn't hosted a meeting since the Reagan administration. There was no mayor, no police, no utility service, no local taxes, and no one to tell me no. That was exactly what I needed. My name's Mark Hastings, retired Army captain, divorced, no kids, and a pension that was barely enough to cover rent in the city, but just enough to start over somewhere no one else cared about. After 22 years of order, structure, and sacrifice, all I wanted was land, freedom, a shot at something that was mine and mine alone. So when I found out the county had listed an entire town, 250 parcels, once a mining community, as surplus property for public auction, I submitted my bid. One sealed envelope, one number, one desperate hope that no one else was crazy enough to see what I saw in it. They weren't. I won. I paid less than most people do for a one-bedroom condo. Overnight, I became the legal owner of every residential plot, every business frontage, every stretch of gravel road. No HOA, no city council, no zoning board, just me and the land. Most people thought I'd lost my mind. My brother called it a tetanus trap. My lawyer laughed. But I had a plan, and it wasn't to live out the rest of my days drinking beer on a porch full of scorpions and broken dreams. I saw a resort, not a Disneyland, not some sterile timeshare factory, but something raw, real, and rooted in history. Ghost tours, horseback trails, reconstructed cabins, a frontier museum, maybe even hot springs, if the survey was right. I pictured dusty boots on creaky wooden floors, families roasting marshmallows under unpolluted stars. It wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be easy. But I had the time. And something to prove. I started with a hardware store, or what was left of it. The roof had collapsed years ago, so I pitched a tarp and spent 2 months restoring it beam by beam. I pulled up termite-eaten floorboards, installed solar panels, and converted the back room into a tool depot and tiny office. From there, I began clearing brush, cataloging lots, and identifying which buildings could be salvaged versus which ones needed to come down. It was brutal work. I sweat through 3 shirts a day. I bled more than once, and for weeks the only sound I heard was wind whistling through broken windows and the occasional hawk overhead. But slowly life started returning, not just to the buildings, but to me. By the end of the second year, I had a working general store, a visitor center, and a pair of rentable cabins with water filtration, composting toilets, and Wi-Fi strong enough to upload Instagram photos. I hired 2 local veterans, part-time guys, who needed purpose more than paychecks, and they helped me finish the gravel grading and perimeter fencing. Then came the press. A lifestyle blogger stumbled on my story and called it the coolest desert town you've never heard of. Then a YouTuber came. Then a minor travel magazine. Before long, I had weekend bookings from LA, Phoenix, even New York. They came for the novelty, sleeping in a ghost town, but they stayed because it felt real, untouched, the anti-resort resort. Some visitors liked it so much, they wanted to stay longer. One couple, Karen and Douglas Vance, everyone just called him Doug from Oregon, offered to buy a cabin outright. I said no, I wasn't ready to sell yet, but I agreed to a 12-month lease. Others followed. Retirees, remote workers, a couple families homeschooling their kids in RVs. It wasn't a flood, but it was a steady stream, and I was grateful. It gave the place soul again. We had bonfires, movie nights, a community garden in an old church lot. People painted murals over cracked stucco and played music in the square. For the first time in decades, Desert Willow had people. It had laughter. It had rhythm. But then the meetings started. At first, the meetings were innocent enough: potlucks on Saturday nights, porch beers at sunset, people sitting around the fire pit talking about how to get Amazon to deliver out here, or whether we should buy a bigger communal water tank. Nothing strange. Every small community has those moments when people naturally pitch in to make life easier. But it didn't stay innocent. One evening, I came back from fixing a pump and found a flyer taped to the general store door in neat, bold computer print. Community Governance Committee. Meeting this Friday, 7 p.m., Cabin 14. No signature. Just the words and a little clip art gavel that made my stomach turn. I asked around. "Oh, it's just some folks wanting to talk about trail maintenance," one renter said. "You know, rules of the road and stuff. Rules of the road." I felt the old cold twinge I used to get right before a patrol went sideways. I showed up anyway. Better to see the snake than step on it in the dark. Cabin 14 belonged to Karen Delaney and Douglas Vance. Doug passed out typed agendas like we were at a corporate retreat. Karen had a color-coded spreadsheet titled Potential Community Standards. Quiet hours, maximum garden plot size, approved exterior paint colors, commercial activity guidelines that one made me raise an eyebrow since I still owned every single commercial lot. I waited until the end, then asked the only question that mattered. Who elected this committee? And who gave it authority? Doug smiled the way officers smile when they're about to tell you the mission has changed. "It's not official," he said. Yet. That single word rang in my ears the whole drive back to my cabin. I had spent 3 years pouring blood and savings into resurrecting Desert Willow from a corpse, and now a handful of newcomers who had arrived with a shiny Airstream and zero calluses wanted to write the Constitution. Something ancient stirred in me, the same instinct that had kept me alive through too many nights in places that had no rules except the ones enforced at gunpoint. Control is never given. It is taken quietly at first, then loudly, then by force. If they wanted what I had built, they were going to have to come through me. The next morning, I walked the main strip before the sun got brutal the way I always did. Dust kicked up behind my boots. The silence was so complete, I could hear a hawk's wings half a mile up. My eyes were sharper than usual, scanning for anything out of place. They didn't have to look far. 6 months earlier, the old schoolhouse had been a rotting shell roof, collapsed raccoons in the bell tower floorboards like wet cardboard. Now it stood proud new beams. Fresh windows, solar roof lights, salvaged desks, turned into a co-working space for remote workers. It was proof of what this place could be restored, not remade into someone else's fantasy. That was exactly what the committee wanted to do: erase the raw edges and replace them with their version of pretty. They didn't see history. They saw a blank canvas for beige stucco and matching mailboxes. I tried to keep an open mind. I had invited people in. I had leased cabins. I had told them to treat Desert Willow like home. Maybe I was the one resisting necessary change. So I asked the quiet ones, the ones who hadn't shown up to the meeting. Greg, a retired train conductor who lived out by the canyon rim, laughed so hard, coffee came out his nose. Mark Y came here to get away from HOAs. If somebody starts telling me what color my shutters can be, I'll be the first one striking matches. Maya, the yoga teacher, who had turned the old chapel into a wellness studio, put it simpler. It's your land, right? I thought the whole point was no boards, no rules, no busybodies. That settled it. I called a real town meeting. No printed agendas, no secret flyers. Just word of mouth and a piece of chalk on the board outside the store. Community gathering. Let's talk about the future. Tonight, 8 p.m., Town Square. 32 people showed up. Karen and Doug sat in the back row with legal pads and crossed arms. I kept it short and plain. This town is unincorporated private land. There is no city council, no HOA, no municipal government. That was the appeal for me, and I thought for most of you. Lately, some residents want to create structure rules, committees, maybe even power. I'm not against safety or cooperation, but we have to decide together what we're building and who gets to decide it. A woman raised her hand. So you're saying no one ever gets a say? That's just dictatorship with extra steps. Fair question, I said. Here's the answer: I own every square inch. That's not ego, that's legal fact. I pay the taxes, carry the liability, maintain the roads, and I've invested everything I own. I'm happy to listen to ideas, but I will not surrender ownership or let a self-appointed group claim authority without law or consent. Karen stood without waiting to be called on. You keep calling this a community, she said, voice sweet enough to rot teeth, but a community has to be shared. It can't be one man's kingdom. If you want us to invest our lives here, we deserve a voice. You have a voice, I replied. You're using it right now. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, even though the night was warm. Karen sat down. Doug whispered something in her ear. I didn't need to hear it to know the next move was already in motion. A week later, the new flyer went up bigger, bolder, printed on glossy cardstock. Proposal for the establishment of the Desert Willow Homeowners Association. Bylaws, dues, architectural guidelines, quiet hours, pet policy, commercial restrictions, protecting property values, and ensuring shared standards. There were no property values to protect. No realtors, no county zoning maps. Yet here they were, acting like this was a gated subdivision in Scottsdale. Then the notices started appearing on doors. Lydia, the retired ICU nurse, with the old RV, found a typed letter claiming her porch furniture was out of aesthetic alignment with community character. Rob got warned that his rainwater barrels needed HOA approval, even though I had personally helped him install them. They had begun calling themselves the board. It was escalating faster than I expected. They weren't suggesting policies anymore. They were enforcing them, and some residents were confused enough to believe the warnings were real. That's when I stopped asking nicely. I called my lawyer the next morning, the same one who had laughed when I told him I was buying an entire ghost town. How do I stop a rogue HOA from trying to become the government of a private town I own? He went quiet for a long second, then let out a low whistle. They're trying to form an HOA without owning the land. Exactly. That's bold. Also completely unenforceable, but bold. Your deeds are airtight still. It's going to get ugly. I told him ugly was fine. I'd done ugly before. That night, I stayed up until the stars faded, reading every page of the original deed bundle under a single desk lamp. Hundreds of pages of legalese plat maps and state dissolution orders. I highlighted every line that proved the old mining town had been officially dissolved decades ago, that it had no municipal status, that every parcel had been transferred to me in clean title. They had zero authority. Zero. But authority and belief are two different animals. People like Karen Delaney don't stop because of law. They stop because of pressure consequences, or both. I decided it was time to bring both. Before the flyers, before the self-appointed board, before the intimidation disguised as community standards, there had been a time when the people who came to Desert Willow just wanted to breathe. I remember the first long-term residents like they arrived yesterday. Lydia Mendez rolled in with a 20-year-old RV, a three-legged dog named Rusty, and eyes that had seen too many people die in the last year of the pandemic. She parked near the old chapel, watched the first sunrise, hit the canyon walls, and cried so hard Rusty started howling with her. She told me later she hadn't felt safe enough to cry in 5 years. Rob, the twice-divorced electrician from Nevada, showed up with nothing but a toolbox and a bad attitude. He rewired 3 cabins before I even offered to pay him. When I tried, he shrugged and said, "You already gave me something nobody else would. A place that doesn't ask questions." Elena planted herbs behind the general store without asking permission. Maya turned the chapel into a yoga space and started sunrise classes for whoever showed up. A family from Idaho parked their schoolie beside the old blacksmith shed and never left. We fixed roofs together, watched each other's kids build picnic tables out of scrap lumber, and painted the town sign bright turquoise just because we could. Someone suggested we call the place The Willow. It stuck. We had cooperation. We didn't need governance. Then Karen Delaney and Douglas Vance arrived in a brand new Airstream so shiny it looked like it had never seen dirt. Karen stepped out in wedge sandals in the desert, and Doug wore a Columbia fishing vest that still had the price tag dangling. They didn't ask about the mine, the history, or the work already done. They asked where the clubhouse was. I told them we had a fire pit, and a general store. Karen's nose wrinkled like she'd smelled something dead. Doug squinted at the horizon, as if he were already redrawing lot lines in his head. We were told this was being developed into a planned resort community, he said. It's a private redevelopment project, I answered. No HOA, no formal board, just neighbors helping neighbors. Karen gave a tight little smile. But surely there are rules. Just one, I said. Don't mess with other people's freedom. They took the lease anyway. I could feel the shift the moment they moved in. Karen started photographing people's yards. Doug asked if he could draft informal guidelines. They turned potlucks into PowerPoint nights. They used the word rebranding like it was holy. And they weaponized fear. Doug cornered Lydia one afternoon and told her that her RV spacing violated modern fire codes and that her insurance would be void if anything happened. Lydia showed up at my door shaking, convinced she had to leave. I sat her down, walked her through the land use rights, and reminded her that Doug Vance had exactly as much authority as the tumbleweeds blowing through the square, none. But the seed was planted. Others started asking the same questions. Is Karen really on some kind of board? Do we have to pay the new maintenance fee? What happens if they vote on new rules? Then came the sign. One morning, I walked into the square and found a 4-foot wooden placard driven into the ground beside the old well. Welcome to Desert Willow, a private HOA community, rules and notices at Cabin 14. I stood there so long the sun climbed halfway up the sky. It wasn't just a lie. It was a declaration of occupation. I ripped the sign out of the dirt with both hands, carried it across town, and dropped it on Karen's doorstep like a dead animal. An hour later, she was at my office, Doug trailing behind with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. I don't think that was necessary, she said ice calm. And I don't think your sign was legal. Doug opened the folder. We're just trying to bring order to a place that clearly needs it. People are confused. They don't know who's in charge. I said. He gave me the same pitying smile officers give enlisted men right before they send them on a mission that won't come back. Maybe that's the problem. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was a friendly disagreement. That night, I sat down with the county plat map, every deed, and my phone on video record. I filmed every building I had restored, every road I had graded, every resident who had poured sweat into this place. Then I drafted a letter to every tenant, enclosing copies of their lease and a single bold paragraph. There is no HOA. There is no board. There is no governing body except the landowner, Mark Hastings. You are protected under direct landowner rights. Anyone claiming otherwise is misrepresenting the law. I mailed them the next morning. Some residents thanked me. Some stayed quiet. Karen and Doug doubled down. Less than a week after I mailed the letters, a new wave of glossy flyers appeared overnight on the general store counter inside the cafe cabin, even taped to the door of the little laundromat I had built out of the old post office. Same clean design, same heavy cardstock, same QR code, that now led to a full Google Sites page titled Desert Willow Neighborhood Committee, Shaping Our Shared Future. The headline was no longer a proposal, it was a declaration. Weekly meetings every Thursday 7 p.m., Cabin 14. Help us build the governance our community deserves. They had dropped the word HOA entirely like a criminal changing aliases after the wanted posters go up. But everyone knew exactly who was behind it. I clicked the QR code on my phone. The site was slick mission statement, proposed bylaws, a calendar, even a join the committee form. One page was titled Draft Governance Proposals and listed in calm bureaucratic bullet points. Mandatory Architectural Review Committee. Monthly dues suggested 75 to 150 years. Resident compliance expectations. Special assessment structure for capital improvements. Fines and lien procedures. They were writing an entire government on land they didn't own, for buildings they didn't pay for, using authority that existed only in their imagination. I knew I had to be in that room on Thursday. Thursday night, Cabin 14 was packed. 35, maybe 40 people. Folding chairs in perfect rows, a projector, throwing slides onto a bedsheet tacked to the wall. Doug stood at the front in a pressed shirt like he was giving a quarterly earnings call. Karen sat beside him, legs crossed, nodding along like a proud principal. They had a whiteboard now. At the top, written in red dry erase marker, were the words, Desert Willow, a community in transition. Doug launched into a speech so rehearsed, I could almost see the teleprompter in his eyes. Community is about collaboration, order, and shared vision. As Desert Willow grows, we must protect what makes it special, losing property values, aesthetic harmony, and clear standards. This committee is not here to take away rights. We are here to protect them for everyone. He clicked to the next slide, a pie chart labeled Resident Survey Results. 72%, he claimed, wanted some form of organized governance. I looked around the room. I recognized maybe half the faces. Some looked excited, some looked uncomfortable. A few looked like they'd been dragged there by a spouse. Then came the map slide, every lot in town, color-coded green, yellow, or red. My cabin, the general store, the visitor center, the schoolhouse, every building I still held title to was blood red. Karen took the floor. "No one wants conflict," she said, voice honeyed and sharp at the same time. "But when one individual holds absolute power, we risk a different kind of disorder, benevolent dictatorship. We believe residents have the moral, if not yet legal right, to establish norms that reflect our shared values." She passed out anonymous paper surveys. Should Desert Willow have a formal governing body? Should guidelines become enforceable policies? Would you support modest monthly dues for community improvements? It was theater. They couldn't enforce a parking ticket, but they were creating the illusion of consensus. And illusions have a way of becoming real if no one calls them out. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. Doug hesitated half a second, then nodded. "Of course, Mark. The chair recognizes the landowner." I didn't sit. I walked to the front so every person in the room could see my face. "I built this town." I began, voice low enough that they had to lean in. "I cleared the brush, poured the concrete, laid the gravel you drove in on. I wired the solar panels that power your lights and your Wi-Fi. I have zero problem with organization, cooperation, or safety. What I have a problem with is a coup wearing a smile and a clipboard." A few nervous laughs, a few sharp intakes of breath. "I own every parcel. Every lease you signed says exactly that. What's happening here tonight isn't collaboration. It's an attempt to override private property law with a Google form and a committee title. If you think you can vote away my deeds, you are sadly mistaken." Karen opened her mouth. I raised one finger. "I'm not done." I turned to the room. "You want to paint your cabin purple? Do it. You want goats, wind chimes, a 20-foot metal rooster? Knock yourself out. That's why you came here. Don't let two people with a color printer turn this place into the prison you escaped from." Dead silence. Doug tried to recover. "This isn't about control, Mark. It's about stability. We're happy to draft a memorandum of understanding." "There will be no memorandum," I said. "There will be no board. And if one more fake violation notice lands on a resident's door, I will treat it as harassment and respond accordingly." I walked out. That night, someone cracked the front window of the general store, dumped trash across the porch, and stapled a new flyer to my door. "Resist the king. Long live the people." Cute. The next morning, I filed a sheriff's report mostly for the paper trail and called Tessa Chang, a civil litigator who specialized in land rights and unincorporated jurisdictions. 3 days later, she rang back. "Mark, what they're doing isn't criminal yet, but it's skating right up to the edge. One more vote claiming authority over leased land, and we can slap them with declaratory relief and an injunction so fast their heads will spin." "Do it," I said. "I'll need sworn statements from residents who've been threatened or misled. You'll have them by tomorrow." I hung up, stepped outside, and watched the sun sink behind the hills. Desert Willow looked exactly the way it had the day I first saw it, silent, wounded, full of possibility. I had given these people a second chance. Now I had to fight like hell to keep it from being stolen. It didn't take long for the flyers to cross the line from committee into open warfare. 1 week after the Cabin 14 showdown, I came back from grading the South Trail and found a new notice nailed to the community bulletin board like a Declaration of Independence. No greeting, no date, no pretense left. Desert Willow HOA. Official charter announcement. Effective immediately, the Desert Willow Homeowners Association assumes responsibility for enforcing community standards, managing shared resources, maintaining neighborhood cohesion. Board Officers President, Douglas Vance, Vice President, Karen Delaney, Secretary, Margaret Klein, Treasurer, Stephen Holt. And then, in tiny print at the bottom, the sentence that made my vision go red. By continuing to reside in Desert Willow, you acknowledge and agree to abide by all HOA policies as a condition of tenancy. They had just rewritten every lease in town, without asking a single person, least of all the only person whose signature actually mattered, mine. I tore it down so hard, the nail came with it. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, watching, arms folded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You're making a mistake," she called across the empty square. "No," I shouted back. "You just declared war on the wrong veteran." That same afternoon, I hand-delivered certified cease and desist letters to every name on their fake board. Each envelope contained 1. A full copy of the county plat map stamped by the recorder's office showing 100% ownership under Mark Hastings, LLC. 2. A notarized affidavit from Tessa Chang stating that the Desert Willow HOA had no legal existence and that any claim of authority constituted fraudulent misrepresentation. 3. A polite but unmistakable warning that further action would trigger lawsuits for slander of title, tortious interference, and harassment. I expected pushback. I got escalation. 3 days later, Rob knocked on my door holding a sealed envelope that had been left on his porch. Inside was a letter on faux letterhead, emblazoned with a Desert Willow Tree logo. Desert Willow Compliance Division Violation Notice Number 04, Resident Robert McAllister, Violation. Unpermitted exterior lighting, solar string lanterns required action, remove within 7 days. Fine if non-compliant, $250. Rob's face was the color of ash. "Mark, is this real?" "It's real paper," I said. "That's all it is." He exhaled so hard, his shoulders shook. "Then why do I feel like they're winning?" "Because that's how coups work, not with tanks, but with paperwork and fear. One violation notice at a time until people forget there was never a fire in the first place." I called another town meeting, this time in the open air, right in the middle of the square. I brought my portable PA, a generator, and a stack of folders thick enough to choke a mule. Tessa joined via Zoom, projected onto a white sheet hung on the old cafe wall. Over 50 people showed up. Even Karen and Doug stood at the back, arms crossed, daring me to do something. I held up the thick county envelope that had arrived that morning. "This," I said, "is an ultimatum, dressed up as bureaucracy. They want me to surrender ownership of roads, water systems, and decision-making authority to a group that has contributed exactly $0 and zero sweat to this town. They scheduled a community vote they have no right to hold. They are telling you that if you live here, you now work for them." I passed out single-page forms. "I do not consent to incorporation or HOA formation in Desert Willow. Signature all." Date Bohog. Tessa took over the mic. She walked them through Arizona revised statutes line by line. How an unincorporated area cannot be forced into municipal status without majority's landowner consent. How HOAs require recorded covenants signed by the developer, me. How fines issued without legal authority are nothing more than extortion on fancy stationery. By the time the stars came out, 43 people had signed the anti-consent form. 9 abstained. 5, including Karen and Doug, walked away without a word. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office with a stack of notarized forms and laid every deed across the counter like a royal flush. The clerk, a quiet woman named Dolores, who had worked there since Nixon disappeared into the back and returned with the staff attorney. "Your petitioners never mentioned the land is still 100% privately held by a single owner," the attorney said. "They wouldn't," I replied. 10 minutes later, the incorporation petition was stamped rejected, and a formal cease and desist order was issued against Karen Delaney, Douglas Vance, and their entire fake board. I thought that would be the end of it. It was only the beginning of the end. That weekend, I woke to find the Desert Willow welcome sign spray-painted black with giant white letters. "One man should not rule a town." And staked beneath it, a new professionally printed banner. "People's vote this Sunday, 4 p.m. Cabin 14, Real Democracy. Be heard." They were going to hold a shadow election anyway. No county oversight, no legal ballots, just a cardboard box and the illusion of legitimacy. This time, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to shut it down in front of the entire town. Sunday, 3:45 p.m. The temperature had climbed past 104, but the square outside Cabin 14 was already feeling like it was election day in a real town. Karen stood out front in a crisp white blouse, shaking hands and passing out cold water bottles like a candidate working the rope line. Doug had set up a folding table under a pop-up canopy. On it sat a cardboard box with a slot cut in the top and a hand-lettered sign in red marker. Democracy, not dictatorship. Vote, here for your future. Professional yard signs ringed the area. Let the people decide. One landlord, one leader. A voice for Desert Willow, HOA, now. Some residents even wore campaign buttons. Actual buttons. I didn't know you could get those printed in under a week in the middle of the desert. I stood at the edge of the crowd for a minute and just watched. It was surreal, like someone had dropped a suburban city council race into the set of an old western. Kids chased each other between the signs. A couple of retirees argued about parking. Someone had brought a cooler of lemonade. And at the center of it all, Karen and Doug were smiling like they had already won. They hadn't counted on Tessa. I had picked her up at the tiny airstrip at dawn. She stepped off the plane in a navy suit sharp enough to cut glass boots, polished briefcase in one hand, court orders in the other. We didn't walk into the square, we marched. At exactly 3:55, we climbed the 3 steps of the old church, the highest point anyone could stand without a ladder, and I plugged the PA system into the generator. Tessa tapped the microphone twice. The feedback screech cut every conversation dead. "Good afternoon," Tessa began, voice carrying clear across the square. "My name is Tessa Chang. I am a licensed Arizona attorney representing Mark Hastings, sole owner of every parcel in Desert Willow. I am here today to deliver formal legal notice. You could have heard a scorpion cross the dirt." Karen's smile froze halfway up her cheeks. Tessa held up a thick packet stamped in red, official cease and desist order, County of Mojave. "The activity scheduled to take place here in 5 minutes is illegal under Arizona law. You do not have the right to conduct a vote that implies jurisdiction over private property you do not own. You do not have the right to collect ballots that suggest municipal authority where none exists. Any person who deposits a ballot in that box after this notice is served will be participating in an act of fraudulent misrepresentation and may be held jointly and severally liable in civil court." She walked down the steps like she owned the ground itself and handed sealed copies to Doug and to Karen personally. Doug tried to interrupt. Tessa just kept talking over him. "I also hold in my hand every single lease agreement executed in Desert Willow. None of them contain HOA covenants, deed restrictions, or governance clauses. Proceed at your own peril. We will file for injunction tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. sharp, and we will win." I took the microphone. "I gave you all one last chance to do this the right way," I said. "You chose theater instead. So here's the final act." I looked straight at the crowd. "You want to know what freedom looks like? It looks like walking away from a lie." And then something I will never forget happened. Anna, the young mother who had moved here with 2 little kids and a beat-up van, stepped forward first. She held her ballot high enough for everyone to see, tore it clean in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the dirt. Rob was next, then Lydia, then Maya, then Greg. One by one they came forward, some angry, some ashamed, some simply relieved. They tore their ballots and dropped the scraps on the table in front of Doug's cardboard box like confetti at a funeral. Karen's face went from red to white to something I don't have a name for. She grabbed the microphone from the table. "Don't listen to them," she shouted. "This is intimidation. They're using lawyers and fear to silence you." But no one was listening anymore. The spell was broken. The illusion that a handful of flyers and a ballot box could overwrite property law had shattered in the desert heat. Doug stood frozen, mouth half open, papers slipping from his hand. Karen spun on her heel, wedge sandals kicking up dust, and stormed off toward cabin 14. Doug lingered just long enough to gather the shredded ballots into a pathetic pile, then followed her like a whipped dog. Tessa leaned over to me and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Congratulations, Mark. You just won an election without casting a single vote." We spent the next 3 days mopping up. Tessa drafted termination letters for the fake HOA and mailed them to every resident. Anyone who had paid dues under duress got refunds and affidavits nullifying the payments. A few people came to me privately, eyes down, offering apologies. I accepted everyone. Grudges are heavy, and the desert is hot enough without carrying extra weight. Karen and Doug packed their Airstream the following Friday and left before sunrise. I never saw them go, but I found a single campaign button on the ground outside cabin 14. It said HOA now in cheerful red letters. I keep it in a drawer next to my dog tags. I thought the story was over. 2 weeks later, Tessa called while I was patching shutters in the 100-degree heat. "They lawyered up," she said without greeting. I let the drill drop to my side. "You're kidding." Scottsdale real estate firm. They filed this morning in Superior Court. Defamation, tortious interference, wrongful prevention of a legitimate community association. And get this, they want a court-ordered transfer of management authority over all leased parcels. I laughed so hard the lizards scattered. "They're suing me for not letting them steal my town." Pretty much. "Let them come," I said. Courtrooms have rules, and this time the rules are on our side. The lawsuit landed like a mortar round nobody saw coming. Karen Delaney and Douglas Vance versus Mark Hastings case number CV2055094567, Superior Court of Arizona, Mojave County. Causes of action: defamation, tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, 3. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, 4. Declaratory judgment that a de facto homeowners association had legally formed, 5. Injunctive relief forcing me to recognize and cooperate with their HOA and transfer day-to-day management authority over every leased lot. They wanted money, a public apology reinstatement of their charter, and in plain English, the keys to my town. Their complaint read like a HOA fever dream. They claimed that by inviting residents and accepting lease payments, I had created reasonable reliance that an HOA would eventually govern the community, and that my campaign of intimidation had damaged their reputations and the incipient property values of Desert Willow. They even attached glossy photos of the shredded ballots as evidence of voter suppression. Tessa read the filing, once closed the PDF, and started laughing so hard she had to wipe her eyes. "They're arguing you committed fraud by refusing to let them commit fraud." That's a new one. We counterfiled the same week motion to dismiss motion for summary judgment, counterclaim for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and slander of title. Tessa attached everything. The county rejection stamp, the cease and desist order, the video of Karen claiming authority in the square, the fake fine Rob received for Christmas lights in July. The judge set a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the story escaped the canyon. It started with a local blog, then a Phoenix TV station, then national pickup. Headlines multiplied like jackrabbits. Ghost town owner sued by residents. Trying to form rogue, government, desert, showdown, one man versus. The HOA that never was, Army vet battles, couple who declared themselves mayor and first lady of a town they don't own. The worst one used that old Hellman photo of me in full kit eyes, squinting into the sun. The caption called me the tyrant of Desert Willow. I wanted to punch through a wall. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do when the world got loud. I worked, and I told the truth. I wrote a single post and pinned it to the top of the town website, the bulletin board, and emailed it to every news outlet that would listen. To the people of Desert Willow, and to anyone watching from the outside. I bought this place when it was nothing but broken windows and regret. I rebuilt it with my own hands because I believed people deserved a corner of the world where no one could fine you for the color of your shutters or the height of your weeds. I never asked to be anyone's king. I asked only to be left alone to build something real. The lawsuit against me is fiction stacked on top of fiction. But the danger is real, the idea that a handful of newcomers can arrive, print some rules, and demand ownership of land they never paid for. This isn't about me. It's about every person who has ever been bullied by an HOA. Every veteran who just wants quiet, every family looking for a place where the only rule is decency. I will fight this in court, and I will win. Mark Hastings. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails, letters, phone calls. Veterans from 3 wars. Widows who had lost homes to $47 lien foreclosures. A retired couple in Montana sent a check for $500 for legal ammunition. A veterans group overnighted a bronze plaque that read, "Defender of Liberty, Builder of Peace." I didn't feel like a defender. I felt like a man who just wanted to finish fixing the South Trail without lawyers. But the tide had turned. On the morning of the hearing, Tessa and I walked into the courthouse with 4 residents ready to testify: Rob, Lydia, Maya, and Anna. The gallery was packed, reporters, curious locals, even a documentary crew. Karen and Doug sat at the plaintiff's table with their Scottsdale attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than my truck. Their lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my clients represent the legitimate aspirations of a growing community. Mr. Hastings invited residents accepted rent and allowed the organic formation of associational governance. His subsequent campaign of threats and legal intimidation constitutes bad faith and tortious interference with the community's reasonable expectations. Tessa didn't even stand up all the way before she started talking. Your Honor, the plaintiff's entire claim rests on a fantasy that private land becomes public the moment someone prints a flyer. Here is the recorded deed to every parcel in Desert Willow. She dropped a 4-inch binder on the bench with a thud that echoed through the courtroom. Here is the county's rejection of their incorporation petition. Here is video of plaintiff Karen Delaney informing a new resident that HOA dues are mandatory. Here is a $250 fine issued for solar string lights on property the plaintiffs have never owned. She slid another folder forward. And here, Your Honor, is a cease and desist order issued by the county clerk after the plaintiffs attempted to hold an illegal election. The judge, a gray-haired Marine vet himself, flipped through the documents without expression. Then he looked up at Doug. Mr. Vance, did you personally draft and distribute the violation notice contained in Exhibit 17? Doug swallowed. It was a community effort. Did you draft it? Yes, Your Honor. The judge turned to Karen. Ms. Delaney, did you authorize its distribution? She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, yes. The gavel fell like a gunshot. Motion to dismiss granted with prejudice. Counterclaims for costs and fees will be heard next month. Plaintiffs are advised to retain counsel for the malicious prosecution phase. Court adjourned. Reporters mobbed us on the courthouse steps. Someone shouted, Mr. Hastings, do you feel vindicated? I looked out at the desert stretching gold and endless behind the parking lot and smiled for the first time in weeks. No, I said. I feel like a man who just got his town back. The gavel was still echoing in my ears when the real healing began. The day after the dismissal, the town exhaled like it had been holding its breath for months. People walked slower. Porch conversations lasted longer. Someone left a 6-pack and a thank you note on my steps without signing it. Lydia baked oatmeal cookies and delivered them in an old coffee can. Rob showed up with his toolbox and said, pick a project, any project, boss. Today it's on me. We didn't celebrate with fireworks or speeches. We celebrated with hammers, paintbrushes, and the quiet sound of things being fixed. I started with the old library building that had been scheduled for demolition before the madness began. We gutted the termite-eaten shelves, poured a new concrete floor, installed donated couches and bookshelves, and turned it into an honest-to-God community center. No board, no dues, no sign-up sheet. Just an open door and a coffee pot that was always on. The retired art teacher started Saturday watercolor classes. Lydia began a weekly grief circle. Someone else dragged in an old projector, and we had movie nights under the stars with a sheet hung on the wall. Then I rewrote every lease from scratch with Tessa looking over my shoulder. The new version was 1 page shorter, but 1,000 times clearer. At the very top, in bold, 14-point font, no Homeowners Association, no governing board. No entity may exercise authority over this land except the landowner. This community runs on cooperation, not coercion. I hand-delivered the new leases myself. Most people signed on the spot and hugged me. A few asked if they could add solar panels or a chicken coop. I told them the only rule was still the same: don't mess with other people's freedom. The ones who had been swept up in Karen and Doug's orbit came by one. Some brought apologies written on notebook paper. Some just stood on my porch, hat in hand, and said I got scared of chaos and reached for the wrong kind of order. I shook every hand and told them the same thing. We all make mistakes. The measure of a person is what they do after. Only 2 families left for good. One older couple who admitted they needed the structure of a gated community, and a younger guy who said he couldn't live somewhere without a noise ordinance. I helped them load their trailers and wished them well. The desert isn't for everyone. But for every person who left, 3 more showed up. Word had spread farther than I ever imagined. RV forums, veteran Facebook groups, off-grid YouTube channels. Desert Willow became shorthand for the place where they beat the HOA with the law and common sense. A family from Idaho arrived with a converted school bus and tears in their eyes. A single mom from California pulled in with 2 kids and a U-Haul full of art supplies. A Vietnam vet named Jeremiah rolled up in a rattling Chevy took one look at the no HOA clause, pulled an American flag out of his glove box, and said, "Son, I believe I just found my last home." We put them to work, and they put their hearts into it. Within 6 months, the year-round population had doubled. We added composting toilets along the canyon trail, strung solar lanterns across the square like Christmas in July, built a free library box shaped like a little red schoolhouse, and installed a community fridge that somehow always had milk and never had drama. Every time someone asked if I was worried another Karen might show up with a clipboard and a dream of power, I gave them the same answer. They might try. But the town has scars now, and scars remember. We had learned. I set up a land trust with Tessa's help. Ironclad documents that guaranteed no future owner, not even a version of me who lost his mind, could ever sell the place to a developer or impose an HOA without unanimous resident consent. Then we created something we called the Circle 8 volunteers who rotated every 6 months. They had zero enforcement power. Their only job was to sit in an actual circle once a month, drink coffee, and help people talk through problems. If someone's dog barked all night or their junk car became a hazard, the circle listened, mediated, and 99 times out of 100, the problem solved itself without a single fine. It turned out people behave pretty damn well when they know no one is waiting to punish them. The press kept coming. A homesteading magazine did a 10-page spread. A veterans nonprofit flew a film crew out and made a short documentary that ended with me standing in the square at sunset saying freedom isn't the absence of rules. It's the presence of trust. A state representative from Tucson read the court transcripts, visited for a weekend, and went home to draft the Desert Willow Protection Act, new limits on HOA formation in rural unincorporated areas, stricter penalties for fraudulent liens, and a landowner Bill of Rights clause that made lawyers across Phoenix groan out loud. One evening, Rob found me installing a new rainwater barrel behind the cafe and handed me the local paper. Front page above the fold, Desert Willow wins landmark case statewide, discussion sparks new protections against rogue HOAs. I handed it back and laughed. Never thought I'd end up legislation. You didn't, Rob said. You just reminded people what the word no is for. That night, we lit the biggest bonfire we'd ever had. Guitars kids running wild, somebody roasting a whole pig they'd traded for with a guy 3 canyons over. I sat on an overturned bucket boots in the dust, watching the flames climb toward a sky so clear you could see the Milky Way like spilled sugar. For the first time and longer than I could remember, I wasn't guarding anything. I was simply home. Years have passed since the courthouse steps, but some mornings I still wake up reaching for a rifle that isn't there, half expecting to see Karen's glossy flyers taped to my window. Muscle memory dies hard. Then I hear the wind chimes, somebody hung on the old general store porch, or a kid yelling that the community fridge has fresh tamales, and the dream dissolves like morning mist. Desert Willow kept growing, but it grew the way canyons do, slow, deliberate, shaped by weather and time, instead of committees and deadlines. We never became a city. We never wanted to. We became something rarer, a place that works because no one is in charge. By the 5th spring after the lawsuit, we had just over 100 year-round souls. The old mining camp that once echoed with nothing but coyotes now had a tiny health clinic run 2 days a week by a retired Navy dentist and a nurse practitioner who drives in from Kingman. A one-room schoolhouse, real desks this time, where Maya and Elena homeschooled 14 kids ranging from 5 to 17. A tool library in the back of the old blacksmith shed checks something out, bring it back fixed or improved. A satellite Starlink dish on top of the water tower that Rob and 3 teenagers keep running for the price of whatever cookies are in the community center that week. A community garden so big, we started a Saturday farmers market for the RV snowbirds who park along the highway every winter. And still no taxes, no HOA, no one measuring your grass. The leases evolved again. Tessa helped me create a legacy clause. When I'm gone decades from now, God willing, the land trust automatically converts every long-term lease, 5 years or more, into a 99-year renewable ground lease at $1 a year, inflation adjusted. No one will ever be able to sell the lots for profit, and no future board can ever form without every single leaseholder agreeing in writing. The desert itself will outlast any power grab. Some of the newer arrivals still ask wide-eyed, "So who makes the rules if somebody goes off the rails?" I point to the circle 8 mismatched chairs under the sycamore tree and say, those 8 people have exactly as much power as you give them by showing up and talking. That's it. That's the whole government. It sounds insane until you watch it work. Old Jeremiah's dog got loose and bit a kid. Nothing serious. 3 stitches. Jeremiah showed up at the next circle with the dog on a leash, tears in his eyes, and asked what he should do. The circle listened. The kid's mom listened. They decided together. Jeremiah built a proper fence, paid the ER bill out of pocket, and started a weekend dog training class for anyone who wanted it. No fines, no liens, no drama. Just neighbors fixing a problem like adults. That's the part outsiders never believe until they see it. The press still shows up now and then. A German documentary crew spent a week here last fall. They kept waiting for the catch, the hidden dictator, the secret dues, the catch and release fines. When they realized there wasn't one, half of them looked relieved, and half looked terrified, like someone had just told them gravity was optional. One night, the director asked me on camera, "Aren't you ever afraid it will fall apart? That without rules, people will turn selfish?" I thought about it while the fire popped and the kids chased glow sticks across the square. "No," I said finally. "I'm afraid of the opposite. I'm afraid one day somebody will walk in here with a clipboard and a smile and convince good people they need to be controlled. But every person who chooses to stay, every fence they build, every tomato they plant, every sunrise they watch from a porch they painted whatever damn color they want, is voting with their life that freedom is worth protecting. And votes like that don't get shredded." The documentary ends with that line. I've never watched it, but they sent me a copy. It's in a drawer next to Karen's old HOA Now button and the bronze plaque from the veterans group. Sometimes tourists pull off the highway just to take a selfie with the hand-painted sign at the edge of town. "Welcome to Desert Willow. Population, people who mind their own business, established the day we said no." Underneath, in smaller letters, someone added with a Sharpie, "and meant it." I still walk the main strip every morning before the heat gets serious. The dust still kicks up behind my boots. The silence is still so clean, you can hear hawk wings half a mile up. But now there are footprints everywhere, little ones, big ones, dog paws, bicycle tracks. The town isn't empty anymore. And every time I pass the spot where Karen once planted her fake welcome sign, I smile at the single stubborn desert willow tree someone planted there instead. It's taller than me now, roots cracking the old concrete purple blossoms every spring. Proof that the right thing left alone grows stronger than any lie nailed to a post. I'm writing this on a quiet November evening in 2025, sitting on the exact same porch where I once drank warm beer alone under a sky full of nothing. The porch is still creaky, the beer is still cold, but everything else has changed. There are lights on in more than 90 cabins and trailers now. Someone's playing an acoustic guitar down by the fire pit. A toddler is chasing Rusty's great-grandpup across the square, both of them laughing like the world was built for that sound. The desert willow tree by the old well is taller than the general store roof, and every spring it drops purple petals that look like confetti no committee ever approved. I never became a mayor, a king, or a legend. I'm just the guy who owns the dirt and refuses to sell it to anyone who wants to put rules on it. People still ask me what the secret is. How does a town with no government, no police, no fines, and no HOA manage to keep the peace, fix the roads, and throw the best potlucks in 3 counties? The answer is simpler than they want to believe. We learned the difference between order and control. Order is when Jeremiah builds a fence because he doesn't want his dog to bite another kid. Control is when someone else threatens to take his house if the fence isn't the approved color. Order is when Anna starts a food truck and half the town shows up to help her wire the solar panels. Control is when a stranger with a clipboard decides tamales need a permit and a $200 fee. Order is earned every day by people who choose to stay. Control is imposed by people who are afraid of freedom, usually because they've never trusted themselves with it. Desert Willow works because every person who lives here has looked at the alternative, the liens, the fines, the smiling tyrants with measuring tapes and said, "Not again, not here, not ever." That's the whole Constitution, one sentence written in sweat and memory. We will not let anyone steal this town again. Some nights I still find a faded campaign button in the dirt, or a scrap of old flyer half buried by the wind. I pick them up, turn them over in my hand, and drop them in the trash can behind the general store. They're relics now, like arrowheads from a war nobody wants to fight twice. The scars are still their quiet ones mostly. A few folks flinch when someone mentions meeting or vote. Rob still double-checks every new resident's eyes for the clipboard gleam. Lydia keeps her new lease folded in her Bible, like a love letter from a better country. But scars aren't shame. They're proof you survived. And we did more than survive. We built a place where a man can paint his cabin purple, a woman can raise goats, a kid can ride a bike until the stars come out, and nobody gets a letter telling them they're wrong for living. That's not utopia. That's just decency with the handcuffs taken off. I don't know how long I've got left on this porch. The desert doesn't hand out guarantees. But the land trust is locked, the leases are unbreakable, and the people here have tasted something most never get a life, where the only person you have to answer to is the one in the mirror. When my time comes, they'll bury me out past the canyon rim where the sun rises first. No headstone, just a simple marker that says, Mark Hastings, he owned the land and gave it back to the people who loved it. Until then, I'll keep walking the strip every morning, boots kicking dust, listening to the sound of a town that learned how to be free. Because in the end, that's what Desert Willow really is. Not a resort, not a rebellion, not even a miracle. Just a promise we all made to each other and to every tired traveler who pulls off the highway looking for a place to breathe. You are safe here. No one will measure your grass. No one will find your joy. No one will ever steal your second chance. Welcome home.